I'm here with Walter Trarbach and Mike Dobson. And Walter is a sound designer, Mike Dobson is a percussionist and Foley artist, and together they collaborated on the SpongeBob Squarepants musical that just had a very successful run in New York City. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the things that they do and the project and all that stuff. So thank you so much for joining us today. Let's start with your collaboration. How did you two come to work together on this project? How did that all come about?
So we both came from different directions. I had a relationship with the director of the show, a genius woman named Tina Landau. She had seen me do Foley in a performance. And just for perspective, I do Foley live, like you guys know from Foley in TV or movies, but it's just happening in a live show, in a theatrical production or anything like that where they want sounds connected to the performers. So Tina was very into that, and she asked me to join a workshop, which was actually over 6 years ago now, in the early development of the show. And I met Walter there, and he came in it. He could tell you how he got involved.
I had a relationship with the producer of the show. I had done some work in the past for Nickelodeon. We did, some of those tours were like Dora the Explorer's in like a big foam suit, and they bring them out into stadiums and kids go crazy. I did a couple of those with like the Backyardigans. I work with a lot of celebrities. The Wonder Pets, So I got to do the Nickelodeon people. So they were doing this workshop for the SpongeBob show, and they called me in, and that's kind of where Mike and I met. It was like a blind date.
It was a great blind date.
It was really good.
Yeah.
And so we started working together and, making sounds for the shows and just doing funny stuff. And we ended up doing it up until it went to Broadway, which was pretty outrageous.
Yeah.
Now, where did you connect with Tina Landau?
So I was doing a little off-Broadway show. It was a bunch of clowns and physical comedians doing like slapstick, silent movie kind of comedy. And I was accompanying it just like I would a silent film. And she happened to see it. This was like 2007, I guess, when she first started working on SpongeBob. And then 5 years later, she was like, hey, I saw you do a thing. Do you want to talk about SpongeBob? And that was it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Mike learned how to do Foley in the circus.
Yeah. So
that's actually true. Yeah.
And he used to do Foley at a sex club downtown.
Yeah. But so I'm a drummer, and I went to music school, and after music school, I started drumming for circuses. And in traditional circus, there's this thing where the drummer does all the sound effects, and it comes from the days before recorded audio when you needed sound effects, and they had to happen live if you wanted them. So the drummer was sort of in charge of that. And so if you look at old pictures of silent movie orchestras or vaudeville orchestras, you'll see the drum set is like a couple of drums and then like 5 tables of sound effects. And it's all these weird little horns and whistles and things like that. And so in the circus, they still do some of that. So that's where I learned about it and then started getting more into putting that mixed with theatrical sound design.
So we'll back up a little bit. You both obviously didn't know each other beforehand. You went to 2 completely different universities and programs. So you were a music major.
Exactly,
And
yeah.
Where did you go?
I went to the Hart School in Connecticut, classical percussion performance. And then I went to the new school, the Mannes College of Music, for my master's, also percussion performance.
And you are sound design major, or?
I got a BFA in technical production with an emphasis in sound design. I went to Boston University in Boston, Massachusetts.
And what was your program like there?
What was my program like? It was a theater conservatory, so I didn't really take any academic classes besides art history. I think I had to take Western Civ too. I learned how to sew, I learned how to weld, I did a lot of carpentry, and the sound portion was basically Pro Tools and doing sound effects, soundscapes, and stuff like that. That's kind of what it was like.
Did you work on a lot of theatrical productions during your time there as well?
I guess I did. We probably worked through the school on 3 or 4 student productions a year in various capacities. Sometimes I'd run the soundboard, sometimes I'd be a carpenter. I always had to work in the shop, like doing carpentry and stuff and building sets. And my school was also affiliated with the Huntington Theater Company in Boston, which is one of their major regional theaters. So sometimes I would work over hire setting up like the comm system or whatever for the plays that were happening there.
And then what was your path from there to where you ended up meeting Dobson? Because he talked a little bit about how he was in the circus and all that.
I left college after 3 years, and I moved to New York, and I was friends with a carpenter who worked here, my friend Joel, who you also know, who's whatever, he's a guy. So he took me around and he introduced me to a lot of people, and I worked off-Broadway doing carpentry stuff and electrics calls and basically just trying to survive. And so over time, I got some relationships with theaters, and then I'd kind of like muscle out their sound guy and take his job, kind of. And then, so I did that, and then I kind of met some more people, and I ended up going out to the La Jolla Playhouse in the summer of 2004, and I was working there because I knew their production manager, and I ended up doing a couple shows out there. And then the last show that I did there, I was there 4 months. The last show I did ended up being Jersey Boys, which is where I met Miss Julie Sloan, and the sound designer Steve Kennedy, who I work for a lot. And so then I kind of started working on Broadway and doing more and bigger shows. And so I worked for Steve doing like associate work and production work, which is kind of installing the sound system. And then the whole time I would also do sound designs on my own, some tours, some plays, some musicals, and that's kind of, I guess, how I got there.
So this is a question for both of you. Mike, you can go first. When did you know that this is what you wanted to do?
Wow. I mean, in a way, when I was 12 or 13 and I got into drums, I was like, this is what I'm going to do. And I really loved playing drums and all of those things, but there's a part of me that hates the scene of classical music. It's all kind of historically pretentious, you know. There's a lot of rich lords and dukes hiring these composers to write them music for their fancy parties. And so the whole thing kind of annoyed me. And like, as much as I liked playing, the whole thing of putting on a tux and like going to be part of this pretentious culture
Mike's a man of the people.
It wasn't a good fit for me. And so working in a lot of different types of industries, aside from the classical music scene, really opened my eyes that, you know, what I could do with music or with sound or any of my skills or things that people perceive as skills that are actually me BSing them. Like any of those could be marketable in another genre of entertainment or whatever. And so theater, even though musicals wouldn't have been the thing I thought I'd be into at all, I like the culture and I like the people and I like the approach to making work and the way that we rehearse and the way that we work on a thing. That all fit me really well. And so that's the thing that made me want to stick with theater and live performance in general.
Did you ever play balloons on the Letterman show or anything?
Yeah, I did that. I did that once. Just a tiny bit of balloons.
Yeah, they called them Mikey Balloons, right?
That was at the sex club.
Oh, so I confuse them.
What about you? When did you know that you wanted to do this?
I still don't know. I think, I don't know. I like what we do in sound. I like the people with whom I get to work. I like the projects. I like that if I don't like somebody, I never have to work with them again. I don't really like the schedule. I don't think it leads to like a healthy lifestyle per se. So I think I will probably continue to do this because, I don't know, maybe I could, you know, make another 10, 15 years and retire. But is it something I really want to do? I don't know. Probably. I don't know.
That's very inspirational.
I don't want to lie to him. But I do like it. I can't deny that.
Okay, let's talk about the SpongeBob project. In having this all come to fruition, what was your favorite part about it?
My favorite part's working with Mike. Just because, you know, I made a new friend. We had a great time. You know, we did it for a bunch of years. We got to do, you know, whatever we wanted, crazy sound effects. We just got to play around and have some fun.
Yeah, likewise. I mean, this relationship starting was so interesting and a bit terrifying and overwhelming, you know, where I'm coming in and, oh yeah, there's this legit real sound designer that's gonna be there. And so you don't know what to expect, or he's gonna have his own angles. And so we were forced to collaborate, and we both wanted to keep our jobs, so we had to do it. But
Pretend
then
to like each other.
Yeah, that's how it has to start. And then you hope it turns into a real thing. And we got lucky that it did. But those times where we would experiment and come up with ideas, and our director is super playful and open to anything. So we could always come in with an idea, try it out, see if it works, and be given the benefit of the doubt in that way. And that is just rare and really fun. And so having that experience of just being able to try things, and the actors were really fun to rehearse with, and we have so much direct interaction with them. So I would say the process and working with everybody and our collaboration was definitely the coolest part of the show.
We developed the show in kind of an unusual and lengthy way. We started out, we did a workshop, I think this was 2011 or 2012, where we spent, I think, 2 weeks just in a rehearsal hall with a bunch of actors, and we didn't have a script. There weren't any songs. We just kind of played around with the actors and explored movement and sound and kind of the language of the piece. So we just would make a bunch of crazy sounds and play them and, kind of laugh. And if people laughed, it was great. And if they didn't, then we'd cut it. And so we did that. And then a year later, we came back and we did another 2 or 3 weeks. And then there was 20 minutes of a script and 2 songs or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we did a little performance. We'd do these 2 weeks and then we'd put on a little performance for the CEO of Nickelodeon or I don't know, big
and
wigs.
they do the thumbs up, thumbs down thing.
Yeah, and they'd say, okay, yeah, it's you can survive to play another year. And then another year went by and we did basically a fully realized production in this off-Broadway theater. We painted the whole theater blue and put up all this wacky stuff.
A room as big as this room.
Yeah.
Was that the coffee shop?
Yeah.
Yeah, a classic stage company.
It's this tiny off-Broadway theater.
Julie mixed it. Yeah. And then there was a 5-piece band and we did a whole version of the show and they invited a bunch of 7 to 14-year-olds to come watch it, and they just focus grouped it. We did it 3 times. We're loading out, and they're just sitting around asking these kids questions did you like the show? And the kids are like, not really, I didn't understand it. We're like, oh.
Where's SpongeBob?
Yeah, and so, but every time we just get to experiment and play and try things, and it was a very rare way to develop it. And then the following summer, we went to Chicago.
Right.
And we did a full show in a giant theater in Chicago for a couple weeks, 6 weeks, I don't know.
6 weeks, yeah.
Yeah, and then we waited a year and a half, and then we brought it to Broadway, and we ran on Broadway for, 9 months, something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
So what's interesting is that the first developmental stage of this was your collaboration on the sound effects, but in the grand scheme of things, you both have other giant jobs that are part of this. Dobson, you're the percussionist, and you're the sound designer, so you're dealing with the system and the miking of the actors and the band and all of that. But that stuff all got basically filled in later when you were starting with actors and sound effects in a rehearsal room.
Totally.
Together.
This is true, yeah.
And that's a really rare thing for sound to be even relevant that early in the process. Most shows get made, and then one of the last things they do is go, okay, well, someone has to turn on the microphones. And then they go, we have to get sound involved. And so for us to be there, to have the sound designer in the room, to have me in the room, and be working with the actors, we're creating the show along with them so that sound is then thrust into more of the spotlight because of it. And so having that opportunity to be there for the development, it allowed us to say, here's an idea, and then the show adjusts to that idea if it works. And so when you come in much later, the script is done, the actors already know what they're doing, and so putting sounds to it, you're very much matching, or it's much more of matching what they've created. And so it was very lucky that we got to be part of the creation process, I think.
So let's talk about the sound effects. Let's talk about where you draw your inspiration from, how you craft them, how you build them, all of that stuff.
In a normal show or this show?
In this show first.
Okay.
Because I know the show is not normal.
Yeah, in a normal show, I read the script that says there's a doorbell, and I get a doorbell. Okay, so we started in the first workshop. I guess we knew it was SpongeBob. Obviously, it's an extant property. So we called Nickelodeon. Obviously, this was sanctioned through them. And we said, send us, all the SpongeBob sound effects. So, they just sent us a ton of stuff, and we kind of parsed through them and took what we needed. And I think probably the first thing we actually integrated into the show was SpongeBob's footsteps.
Right. Yeah. And we didn't end up using a lot of sounds from Nickelodeon, from their SpongeBob library. The SpongeBob footsteps are so iconic. Actually, I'll just play it. This sound, and so for something like that, I don't think that there's a good reason to try to remake it. it sounds like SpongeBob and it's correct. And Nickelodeon owned our show and they owned SpongeBob, so there's no problem with using it. And so we kept it. And same with Squidward. These are, I think, too recognizable to go, oh, I'm going to do like a weird, cool, creative interpretation of that. I think it worked to just leave him alone. Yeah. Krabs we did, because Krabs has like 7 different versions of his sound when he walks. Sometimes it's a xylophone, sometimes it's like wood blocks, and there's like, it's not consistent, so that was easier to just make something that was in the world.
I have to interject a question really quickly. Have you seen every episode of SpongeBob?
Definitely not. But okay. At least like every episode of the first like 15 seasons.
And you?
No, I see like 2 of them. Mike was also the resident SpongeBob dramaturg.
Right. Yeah. The early workshops, it was hard for people who knew anything about the show.
There were a lot of questions.
Yeah. But the director Tina Landau is also a major SpongeBob fan. Is that correct?
Well, she got into it, but when she first got the call, she was like, "No thanks." And then they were like, "Well, we want it to be weird, and we want it to be not the thing that everyone would expect." So she was like, "Okay, maybe." And she watched a few. And she was like, this is like doing drugs. I can't handle too much of this. And then she gradually fell in love with it. But I think for her, it was very much looking at it with a little of a side eye, like, what is this? Do I want to get involved? And then it won her over.
Right. Excellent.
No,
go ahead.
May I?
Yes, please.
Okay. So then in other contexts, when we were playing around with the actors, we'd come up with, we'd see a physicality. We knew kind of our mission was to get Mike as a Foley artist involved. So he had a drum kit, and he'd kind of score things with, hits and like drum hits. And he also had a bunch of found object percussion. I should probably let you talk about this.
Oh yeah, that's fine.
Like bells and squeakers and like little dog toys and stuff that all made funny noises. And so as we'd watch the physicality of what the actors were doing, like SpongeBob would raise his arm and Mike would play like a little squeak. And that was kind of cool. It kind of made a cartoon feeling with the live show. So that was kind of how we brought, I'd say the cartoon energy to the stage. And then if there was something that Mike couldn't do on a live instrument, or we thought it would work better, we'd find a recorded sound cue, and then we'd put it on this little trigger pad he has, and he's got, 64 buttons here, is that right?
It's like the other ones are like 100.
Oh, mommy. And so he could just hit it, so like if somebody was punching somebody, here, punch me.
Yeah, so it's like...
play that. So it's, kind of brings that cartoon thing to life.
Yeah. And as far as choosing sounds goes, there's a lot of emphasis on how it can connect with the actual action. Sometimes like a punch, like that same punch, will have a bit of a, like the whoosh before it sound, like whoosh. And so that part, it makes it way harder to line up, because if you're watching for the connection of the fist and you hit the cue, you are hitting the sound of the arm moving, and then it all feels late. And so a lot of the sounds have to be edited based on how they fit the action, even more than what we actually hear. Because in reality, you can hit a cowbell, you can hit this punch, you can hit a floor tom, you can hit a million things, and as long as it's connected with the punch, people will be like, oh, that was the sound of him getting hit. And especially in cartoons, we're used to the sound of a cowbell or any of those kind of comic hits, like an anvil or something like that. And so editing the sounds and making sure they're nice and tight and that there's no like lead on the front is really important for Foley purposes. And then some of the times we'd be choosing a sound and we'd love something like a little wood block that I would hit, but for other programming purposes, we had to move it around. One example, we had a clock that ticks, like a doomsday clock that's counting down to the end of the world. And so the doomsday clock had a very typical tick-tock sound throughout the show. And so there were times, though, where we wanted the tick-tock to cue the projection also. So it would work better as a recording because of the time code and all that stuff. And so for one of them, though, it was just one tick, and we wanted the hand to move and the sound. So for that, instead of me hitting the woodblock, we put the woodblock on a button, the exact same sound. We just recorded it. And then that button sent a trigger to projections so that when I hit the woodblock, it would cue the clock.
Yeah, so when the show was being performed, Mike was doing the Foley and playing, drums for the hits, and he had this trigger pad which would trigger sound effects electronically, but there was also a MIDI link, so there were times in the show where he would also be triggering light cues off his pad, video cues, anything that had to sync up with sound. He had a steam cue where steam jets would shoot up out of the stage, which is like a lot of pressure.
Right.
You don't want to hit that at the wrong time.
Our stage manager was the only one that red flagged that at all. and it like lasted 2 seconds.
So you were actually triggering the CO2 in the floor?
I triggered the one for Sandy, the Sandy explosion.
I did not know
was
that.
me, and there might have been one other, not the big volcano one. But there might have been one more that I actually...
Yeah, we gave him everything because he was the most really reliable person to take the cues.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the whole thing with doing Foley. Like, if anyone is interested in doing it, when you're doing it live, you are, disrupting the normal system. The normal system of like the sound designer creates the whole world of sounds and puts it in a QLab or something like it, and the mixer would fire them throughout the show. And mixers are really good at that. They're used to it. And so when we're saying that, oh, we're going to have someone else do it, and you have to work with the sound team, and it has to all sound good. One thing you have to be is very, very consistent and reliable, because everybody on the show is kind of like, we're doing this differently, will it work? And so they don't want to deal with your, trying to figure it out. It's just like people lose their patience for it and start to be like, oh, this isn't going to work. And so I found that if you want to convince people over and you want to try to use live Foley or do something like this, the first hurdle is like everyone's going, will it work?
At it?
Yeah, everyone's like, this show's going to happen like ongoing. Like, can this happen 8 times a week consistently? And we're used to the old system, and it works for everybody. So I think being consistent is a big part of convincing people to let you try the idea.
What do you use to edit your sound effects? What software do you use? Because you guys use different systems, don't you?
Yeah, basically, as we were developing this, I'll get back to your last question, then we'll get to this. We'd see something, and if we needed an electronic sound or something, I'd make it. I'd do all my editing in Pro Tools, even though I think if I were doing it now, I'd get into Logic just because it's cheaper and I think does the same stuff, basically. And so I'd make a bunch of sound effects, and I'd give them to Mike, and I'd say maybe one of these would work, and then he'd listen to them, and he'd try it, and he does his stuff in Ableton Live. And he'd trim it up, and then we'd discuss together if we thought that was the best sound effect. That was kind of our process.
Yeah.
But mostly I set it up in Pro Tools, and then he queued it up and aligned it in Ableton.
Yeah, and if I'm making something, I'll usually do in Logic. Like he said, I actually never learned Pro Tools, and I never was really into audio beyond playing percussion until like after college. And so then, I had GarageBand on a computer, and then that translated to Logic very easily, so that's why I learned Logic. But I just never got beyond the very, very basics of Pro Tools. So I love Logic, and it does, like he said, so much. If you're not trying to make like a full pop album, I think you can get everything you need out of Logic. But basically in Ableton, you can do a lot of very quick zhuzhing of a sound very easily, which is one of the cool things about it. If you're working in a context of rehearsals or working with people quickly, if they're like, we need this, and I want a whoosh here, and I want this to happen when this transition happens, it's very easy in Ableton to not just like play sounds and align them with keys, but also to do, the trimming on either side, to like mess with pitch, add any plugins. Obviously, it can do all of that stuff, and it's very quick with it. So it's fun to do, like he said, some amount of editing, get your sound sounding really good before you import it into Ableton, and then in Ableton do the kind of last minute adjustments. There's so much good flexibility with your sends, your outs and everything in Ableton, so it's all very fast and simple once you put it in Ableton.
Did I step on your other answer?
No, what? Did I ignore your other question?
No. Is there another question?
Just checking.
Nope.
Let's talk about what you mic'd in Dobson's rig. What did he have, and how did you mic it for the SpongeBob Live, the one in Broadway?
I don't remember exactly, but I'll give you the gist. I know we had between 16 and 20 microphones on him, I think. So he had a traditional drum kit, which was kick, snare, hat, tom.
No hat.
No hat.
Right.
Kick, snare, tom, 2 toms.
Yeah.
And then he also had, what else did you have?
It's a lot of the like accessories like cowbells and wood blocks and gongs and cymbals and, like he said, these found objects where it's like garbage, essentially, like a garbage can or a frying pan or an old saw blade or like little scraps of metal. These all make compelling sounds for our use. And so there's a lot of that. And he'll never forgive me for the beautiful microphone he had to put on a trash can. And it sounded amazing, so it was worth it.
I never turned it on, but also Mike was playing the percussion book, so he had congas.
Oh yeah, and a glockenspiel.
7 mark trees, I think, if I recall.
We cut it down to 4.
So yeah, we had mics everywhere. So yeah, all the percussion instruments were mic'd, and then he had these dog toys. I had 2 little mics on those, little DPA mics. He had a bunch of like bicycle bells. I think we had 2 mics on those.
Oh yeah, there's a ton of bicycle bells and little squeaky toys. A lot of the squeaks, like SpongeBob, aside from his squeaky shoes, he's punctuated as a character with squeaks. So like if he jumps into the room, there'll be a squeak, or if someone punches him, there'll be a squeak. So we had tons of like dog toys and little bike, like children's bike bells are often squeak toys, or not the bells, but like the bike horn. So stuff like that for SpongeBob squeaks. And I would just say that all these microphones, like it brings up all these other problems that most shows don't have. Like for one, like if this was the stage and you guys are in the audience, I was right there in the house. And so everything I hit, you would hear some version of it acoustically and some version of it through the microphones, which is just annoying all the time for them to be working out those problems. If I was in the pit or in another room, like what's more normal, none of those problems would exist. And then the other thing of just how it's mic'd, mixed with the whole band, aside from my live sound, mixing these weird sound effects and making it feel right in the moment with the narrative, also with the music that may or may not be going on. It's all these obstacles that we had that are unusual, I think.
Yeah, in addition to which he had, we'll say it was 20 microphones. I don't know what it was. It might have been more now that I think about it, but it was downstage of the PA system out in the house. So if we were doing a loud song or whatever, we would get a lot of noise or sound out of the speakers, and it would be going through his mics, and so we'd get almost like a reverb, like a effect on it, because it would come through delayed through his microphones, which was pretty awful actually when it got big. So we had to be really conscientious about which of his microphones were on at any time, and when we got into a song, we'd turn all the microphones off unless there was something specifically that we were planned for. So that took a lot of work. I'd always walk up to him and say, "Oh, are you playing a bell here? Are you playing this?" It was a process.
Yeah, but basically every note I played of the hundreds of sound effects, if it wasn't through Ableton, makes it easy obviously because there's no acoustic. But if it was an acoustic sound, like it had to be specifically this mic is on and every other mic is off, and then 1 second later it's a whole new setup, because we don't want that extra second of all these mics picking up the music. And so, again, very specific from both of them to make all of that work. And I just get to sit there and hit stuff, so that part was easy for me.
We ended up adding a whole nother soundboard basically for you.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
It's my claim to fame.
Yeah.
Have my own board.
Yeah.
Now, both of the theaters that you played, both the Oriental and the Palace, are they're very tall and reverberant. So what you were talking about having Dobson out in the house where you would hear him acoustically, and then did you make specific adjustments for the people in the balcony, or were the acoustics of the rooms such that it carried up there?
I guess we did. When we set up the sound system, there's something called a matrix, which is where you decide which sounds go to which speaker systems. And so I would just constantly be working the house and listening, and if I was in, say, the mezzanine, the second level, and I was missing some of Mike's sounds, I'd say, go to the matrix and let's make Mike Dobson's sounds louder in the mezzanine. And we'd kind of work it out that way. So it was just kind of a constant process of trying to be everywhere and making sure we heard everything we needed to be hearing in all locations.
So with that kind of a situation where you have the player out in the house, you're not necessarily localizing the sound to the action on stage. You're trying to make more of an even less jarring sound for everybody, depending on where they're sitting in the shadows of the architecture and that type of a thing.
I think in the context of this show, we wanted to make all the sounds sound like they were coming from Mike's area. I don't think we ever tried to set up the illusion that the sound effects were actually coming from stage. which
Well, we did with Ableton.
With Ableton, we did, yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
with
but
like
not with the
with like
mics,
the
yeah.
drum kit or
Right.
whatever, we'd never be able to do that because in addition to hearing a ton of acoustic sound out in the house, because he was closer to us than the speakers, we'd also hear it first in time. So our ear would naturally be drawn to the acoustic sound. The interesting thing actually watching the show is when it would first start out, you'd be very conscious of the sounds coming from Mike's area. But after, I don't know, 5 or 6 minutes in the show, you kind of, your brain just adapts to it and you watch the show and you hear the sound effects coming from Mike or the speaker system and you kind of just accept it as how the show is.
Yeah. I think our director filled the beginning of the show with a ton of sounds so that you have to acknowledge it as an audience member and then you kind of get over it, that what is happening. And so, and it's one of the reasons she wanted it out in the house and seen and not in the basement so that people look at it and get it and go, okay, this is what's happening. And then, like he said, they usually would be okay with this world and go along with it. It was very rare, even the people right next to me, every now and then there would be one person that was like, every time I hit something, they were like, what are you doing? And so, but usually people would be on board by a few minutes into the show.
What was the hardest sound effect to come to an agreement on?
There's still two that I don't like. One was one that Mike added after opening that I kept saying I'm going to replace that one. I never did. When the guy went like this,
Oh,
he did the dab, and Mike made a sound
yeah.
which was
It sounds like he's hitting his microphone.
It sounds like he's hitting his
every
microphone
night.
and he's
They
going
all
like
hated
this.
it.
So
Yeah.
every time, every sound person would see it, they'd be like, oh, he hit his microphone.
Took me like 2 weeks to
I
figure
know,
that
but it was
out,
like
yeah.
Everyone else liked it.
And we always said, I said to him 7 times, I'm going to put in a new sound effect there. I can't take it.
Diggs hated it the most.
Oh, well, he
Oh,
he
yeah.
hates a lot of things.
Yeah.
That one, and there was a sound effect in, you know, when you do a show, you spend obviously a lot of hours at the theater, and you kind of, eventually everybody's going to get on each other's nerves, and we all get a little passive aggressive. But I would say the one sound effect that we never really came to an agreement on was in Hero Is My Middle Name. The character playing Sandy does a roar in the song. She goes, roar. And I had a roar that I put in, and you had a roar that you put in. I didn't like your roar. I was like, oh, let's try this roar. And then you're like, no, I don't like that roar. I'd like to do my roar. And I was like, you know, fine, let's do your roar. You know, I don't care. What do I care? It's a roar. You know, and I'm
Right.
still mad about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
There's kind
roar.
of a wedge between us.
It could have been better.
My roar was better.
The thing is, with the roar, though, again, it's like, it's not just about, this is a moment where the character in the middle of a song, as the lyric says, I am Sandy, hear me roar. Like, I am woman, hear me roar.
And we play a roar while she
and
roars.
so she says roar, and she like goes roar, and then there's a huge roar that like embellishes her roar and makes it feel like she's suddenly very powerful, and all the other characters jump back. So it's kind of like creating this split second where we are with her in this moment. And one of the limitations, again, it's not just getting the best roar, but it's getting a roar that has that shape. And that was the hard part, because there's a lot of
About
great...
3/4 of a second.
Yeah, there's a lot of great roars that have like, half of it is build up to it. And then you get the roar, and if you just start, again, if you cut off the front, you ruin the sound, it doesn't sound right. And so a lot of finding that roar was making it work in the shape of the moment. And then the sound of the roar, you know, I concede may not have been the best choice.
That's the only one I can think of that we didn't really ever hammer out an agreement on, or that I felt unsatisfied with.
Yeah.
You got any?
I'm sure I do. Now it's a little removed, but yeah, there's stuff that annoyed me.
Were there
but I
any
can't-
that you went through just repeated incarnations of trying to get the right thing, just like every day?
I would estimate for every sound effect in the show, I bet, I don't want to exaggerate this, but I bet there are 8 times as many sound effects that we tried and cut or, you know, didn't work, or
Totally.
maybe 10 times as many.
Yeah, tons and tons of stuff. And even the SpongeBob footsteps, like, it is the sound that they sent us from the show, and they did that. But getting it to fit and getting it to work, even technically, with the footstep, I had it, it's just 2 sounds, but I had these 2 sounds in something like 16 different places, so that I can play it in different levels and different outputs and all these different things for the show. And so even though it was just the footsteps, there was tons and tons of time for each footstep. And one of the things that Walter created is, even though we were talking about most of the sound the acoustic stuff comes from me, and a lot of it is placed to just sound good in the theater. Some of it we placed on the stage. So we had a couple things where it was upstage, where it sounded like it was coming from the back of the stage, and then other things where his footsteps and Squidward's footsteps would be mapped across the stage. So we had 6 little speakers, or pairs of speakers, in the front of the stage, and then as SpongeBob would walk left or right, or Squidward would walk left or right, I would be on a keyboard moving up or down on the keyboard as they move. So if I'm all the way on the high side of the keyboard, like a musical keyboard, if I'm all the way on the high side of the keyboard, they would be all the way stage left. And if I was across on the other side, they would be stage right. And so as they moved like this, I would follow them, which again, it's really only perceivable for that orchestra section. But
It was the whole theater could kind of get
Could
it.
they? Really?
Yeah, 'cause
Oh, yeah.
we did it in the stacks too. a
oh,
little
cool.
bit, but
Oh, yeah. So you can. And so that kind of stereo placement was a cool thing, but it was like the making of that sound was a non-existent problem, but dealing with that sound was ongoing all the time, dealing with that footstep.
That musical keyboard that you had, did you have it, was it just SpongeBob that was on that, or was Squidward on that as well?
It was SpongeBob and Squidward. And so if you're dealing with like musical keyboards and any of this stuff, I don't know if any of you do these things, but there's a big negotiation of setting up scenes so that like if I have all these buttons as different sounds, I can push to the next scene and then all the buttons can be a whole new set of sounds. And so the problem with that is that if you don't know what scene you're in, a button that you think is like a subtle squeak, you might push it and it's like, like that instead. And that's like the nightmare when you're doing Foley. And so I hate using different scenes within one show. I want to like look at this pad and know that this button is always this. And the problem is that then you run out of real estate. And so one of the things this keyboard was really nice for was all of these mapping sounds were redundant sounds. Every white note on that keyboard was SpongeBob's footsteps. So it was 24 SpongeBob steps. And then the accidentals, the black keys, were Squidward steps. And so the keyboard was always set as that. But so half the notes were SpongeBob, half were Squidward, and the whole keyboard was mapped across the stage the same way.
So that really simplifies it. You can look at the stage and just go by feel at that point without worrying about launching the missiles or something like that.
Exactly. And that keyboard, I play enough piano. I don't really play piano, but I play enough where I could put my hand on it and know what note I'm on, so I don't have to look at it. And this one, I really most of the time have to at least glance to know which button I'm pushing. And so there's a whole game of like, what can you do when you're really watching the stage? What can you do without having to like look down at your hands? So again, the musical keyboard, the nose, different scenes, all that stuff helps for getting through the show as one piece.
So this is probably a good time to ask this question. How long did it take you to figure out the real estate of your space and where you had to put these instruments? Was that an ever-changing process for a while?
Totally, yeah. Always ever-changing from the very, very first workshop. And so we're talking about like there's a drum set and there's all these percussion instruments and then there's all these sounds. And so there might be a moment where SpongeBob's walking and I'm over here and I'm following SpongeBob. And then the next thing that happens is a big music cue where I'm playing a big note on the bass drum. And so I have to have the bass drum out in my hand, I'm reaching for this, and I have to be poised so that I can do this and hit the bass drum when the conductor does this. And so there's a level of moving targets, and so like if SpongeBob walks slower that day, maybe he doesn't get set before the conductor comes in with the downbeat, and then if I'm still following his shoes and ignoring the conductor, I miss the big bass drum, which in that moment is more important than maybe his last step. So then it's like, how do I make sure that I can reach these and the bass drum and sort of everything? And so it was always changing, where everything would move an inch at a time to get it to the spot. And a lot of it is cutting instruments and cutting sounds and deciding on sounds so that you know where to put them. Like there are things that were on a mark tree that then I moved to a different type of mark tree. Mark tree is like the wind chimes, like magic. So magic, yeah. So we have a lot of magic, so you have to have more than one mark tree.
I still don't believe this is true.
So we had this magical bubbles moment, and I used glass wind chimes for that. In Chicago, it was a big ordeal at that moment to like get there because it happened to be way behind me. So I had to fix that for New York to be able to play, because it's all on glockenspiel, the music, and I'm playing these wind chimes as like the magic sound effect moment. And so again, when we got to Broadway, I knew I could put those wind chimes directly above the glockenspiel just for the sake of playing them at the same time.
Oh. Walter, can you talk a little bit about the miking of the actors for the show?
Yes. We were fortunate mostly in the show in that there are a lot of crazy costumes and stuff. But there were very few hats with brims, which are always detrimental to miking. There were a lot of headpieces like these, but you'll see they don't have a brim. Like a baseball cap is no good because we put the microphones right here, and if there's a shelf there, then the sound goes and bounces off and gets in the microphone and it sounds bad. So mostly the principals did not wear hats, so we'd put all their microphones in their hair on center, which worked pretty well. A couple people wore hats and we tried to work around it in different ways. In addition to which, there's a character who sings a song. He's a newscaster and he has a handheld mic, so we used that for some of the stuff. And this is a big tap dance number. Squidward, who's the guy with 4 legs, has a big tap solo, so he's wearing a transmitter and he has microphones on both his feet so they can pick up the sound of the tap dancers. And 8 of those sea anemone also have microphones on their feet to pick up the tap dancers. Pick up the taps on their shoes.
I showed them a picture of the Rockettes' shoes the other week that you also work on that show, but
Yes.
this is a different miking style because it goes down the pant leg, right?
Correct. Yeah, they'd wear like a normal, a normal wireless transmitter. I have one on me, but I don't know where it went. Did I lose it?
You dropped it.
Thank
It's
you.
on the
Yeah,
floor.
probably. They'd wear this, and we'd build a custom rig with a little resistor in it, so it would go to 2 microphones, and each one would run down their pant leg, and we'd basically clip it to their shoes, so when they danced, we'd have that really clean tap sound. At Radio City, because they have just tons of money, they had custom shoes designed in Canada to the tune of several $1 million. So each Rockette, of which there are 84 or 88, I can't remember,
Sure.
there are 2 companies, they each have 2 pairs of shoes, so it's north of 160 shoes with transmitters and microphones built in. So when they need to charge the batteries on the shoes actually plug in. They have a little thing and they all plug in on this little shoe tree. And it's fascinating. It's just spent a ton of money. The show, the running crew for the Radio City Christmas Spectacular has 2 audio cobblers on staff. They just fix the shoes, like modify the shoes, and that's their full-time job. But as an interesting side note, as you may be aware, the FCC sold off a bunch of frequency bands recently, and so now I think of those 160 shoes, I think something like 6 or 8 of the shoes are still workable. So they're seeking a new solution for the Radio City tap sound as we speak. It's going to be a whole new deal this year.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's good times.
Yeah, good times. So
Yeah.
they spent a lot of money on that. It was good for a couple years. So they're working on something new now.
And the transmitters that you used in this show, analog, digital?
Analog, we used a Sennheiser, the 5212 series, and I think the microphones were Sennheiser Mickey 1s mostly. We started with a combination of Mickey 2s and Mickey 1s. Mickey 2s are a little bigger, Mickey 1s are the smallest mic, and we ended up moving over to Mickey 1s exclusively because we found basically it looked better and we could position the microphone a little bit lower because it wasn't so obvious, and we felt like that was a positive trade-off. We'd get better sound out of that mic because we could put it in a better position. That ended up being our feeling.
What sound effect are you most proud of? And this can be completely different answers in this show.
I liked one, we did the song, it's not even a sound effect, but there's like a hip hop song, and on a backbeat, Mike recorded me going,
That was you?
yeah, that's me.
Walter.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and so, nobody heard it in the show except me, but he put it in because he likes me, and he just kind of played on a backbeat. It was fun.
It sounded great. And the composer preferred it to all the other ahs that we tried.
It was a good
Yeah.
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 So maybe that.
Yeah.
Or for a while I was also in it. I don't know if you guys watched SpongeBob, but there's this thing Mike put in which was hilarious. There's this guy, I guess, in SpongeBob who like gets hurt and he goes, "My leg," like that.
Right.
Yeah. So
this show.
Mike had this in the show and it was going really well. And then the guy who voices that character came to opening and was kind of like, I should be getting paid for that. So Nickelodeon called us and they're like, "You got to get that out of the show." So we were like, okay.
But this is all after opening, and it's really hard to do work on the show at that point.
So we went through a couple iterations, but I spent about 3 hours in my office with my kid looking at me like I was a lunatic going, my leg, and like listening to it and trying to make it sound like him. And I was in it for like a week and a half or 2 weeks or something. And then the guy was like, you know what, you guys just use it.
Yeah, apparently it's a misunderstanding. He saw it and was like, hey, that's me, I should get paid. And then his agent really followed through and was like sent a cease and desist or something. And then he heard about this and was like, no, I was just joking. Like, I love that it's it. And so we went through hell to try to get
it was a lot of work. Yeah.
All of anything that I make on the computer that Walter says doesn't sound like crap, I'm very proud of.
You make great sound.
No, anything that he likes, I'm very proud of. But I think my favorite sound I made, it's on here, was for a mic drop, which I just love. Oh, it doesn't sound as...
No, it's not good.
Not good?
No, I made that sound.
No, you didn't.
I made the kunk. I made it for Hands on a Hard Body.
I made this.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
I made it for the workshop.
No, I made this.
One of them I made
And
it.
you gave me this beautiful compliment about it.
Really?
Yeah.
Did I say it was better
I'll
than
never
mine?
forget. This is like 5 years ago.
All right.
It was the only time. So that's why I remember. But I like it because it feels every time we would, basically the guy who had a mic, he'd be like, okay, now like we're all gonna die. And then he would do a mic drop. And every time, like someone on the sound team would be like, hey man, like we gotta, like he can't, like are you hearing this? He can't drop the mic. Like we have to mute that, or like like we have to fix this problem. And so the fact that it worked on so many people so many times, I was very proud of. And I think even at that point, because this got cut from the real show, but I think at that point he had a fake mic for the drum.
Yeah.
So he would come out, he had been talking into a real mic all show, but then at that moment he had a fake mic. So I like that one a lot.
That's a good sound.
I'm pulling over on the sound team. That's
Exactly,
a very good sound.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, that thing with my leg, I really liked making that one because
It was funny because we didn't really watch a lot of SpongeBob, so Mike had, I think, put it into some of the workshops, and I never knew what it was. I never understood it, and then we started doing it in front of an audience, and people who were familiar with the SpongeBob overt thought it was hilarious. It got one of the biggest laughs in the show.
It was.
yeah, it's like
consistently
it's one of those Easter eggs where if you know SpongeBob, you're sort of like waiting for my leg. I think when you come to the show, you're like they're gonna do it. And so if there was enough SpongeBob fans in the house, they would freak out. But I think the joke works because basically it's a moment where there's a rock band and they're handing Squidward their endless rider of their needs, and Squidward's in charge of getting all this crap. So he looks at the rider and it's actually a paper towel roll. So as he starts it, it falls into the pit, the orchestra pit. And when we were doing it in the workshops, it was becoming like a long slide whistle, like it's falling forever. But we hadn't really addressed that we do the long something's falling forever slide whistle later in the show. And so it was really the same joke. And as we moved to Chicago, we knew we had to change it, but we didn't know what. And so then for me, the joke became the literalness of it. He's dropping this rider into the pit. Instead of it going on forever, it's that it hits the keyboard that's right there and hits all the instruments. So it kind of makes this crash of going through the orchestra, and then it's as though one of the orchestra players screams "my leg."
His original version of it was literally like 90 minutes long.
Yeah,
it was like we all just stopped the show and waited, and it kept hitting like a tuba, and like it went on forever.
And then the last thing was a cymbal, and then the cymbal slowly for like a whole minute, and that got cut.
Yeah.
For some reason.
Well, you have the trombone sound in that sound effect, and it took me a significant chunk of time to realize that wasn't being played live.
Right.
I thought that it was a musical cue, and it's actually part of the sound effect. Yeah. I think we'd like to open it up for some Q&A, and then you had a little bit of a demo that you wanted to do as well.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, so folks, we have microphones set up for you to ask questions. If you want to ask a question, please come to a microphone.
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks.
Hello.
So I did hear you say crazy sounds like 5 times. And I know you said you had to use a garbage can for one of the sounds. Was that the craziest prop or tool used, or was there any other random?
Oh yeah. So I think that might be the most like disjunct thing that you would think would be played like an instrument, but like the frying pan is kind of the same way. They like any of these things that are objects of the world, but then are being used for sound. I would say they're all equally crazy, but things like that.
Yeah, the saw blade,
the saw
like
blade.
an oxygen tank.
Yeah,
Did
the
that
oxygen
get
tank got cut, but it sounded good. Yeah, a lot of things, like we just refer to them as found objects, like in music, and so there's a lot of that, and the toys, I think. Like I had these plastic, those tubes you swing around your head and it makes an overtone? It goes, whoo! So those kind of tubes, there's also the ones that like stretch, but it looks the same as those. Those stretch tubes make a great, like, kind of gears kind of sound. So I would use those, which is like clearly just a toy. But I would say there wasn't a lot of focus on my objects being weird. And even some of the recordings, it's like this, I'm 99% sure it's them rubbing a balloon is the sound. And like messing with balloons for squeaks and little like shifts and things was fun to do, but we never used a live, like we didn't have a balloon with a mic on it, and so it was all recorded. But there's a lot of those kind of things where you find something, like old Foley techniques where like celery is great for bones breaking and like, a little bag of
Cabbage or whatever.
Yeah, all those things. And so any of that is applicable, but yeah, it's fun to have, and I say crazy because it's just unusual for our world, but I guess it's not like that out of line. It's like
Not for SpongeBob at least.
exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Other questions? Don't make me call you up.
Good morning.
Hey.
Hi, good morning.
So my question is, so it's a live show and the actors are mic'd, right? Was there any time where maybe the mic wasn't working or maybe they pulled their mic out? Like, how would you work with that situation?
Yeah, it happens all the time. Or they start to sweat, and they get a little bead of sweat in their mic and then the sound can't get through and they sound awful. I mean, it happens every day. So pretty much, or at least 5 times a week. So the SpongeBob, Patrick, and Sandy were the principals. So they all wore 2 mics. So if one went out, there's a button on the console and it would switch to their backup mic, which hopefully would be viable. We also had, I think, handheld mics off stage on both sides. If somebody had a big number and their microphone was out, we could, in theory, run them a microphone. I don't know if that ever worked. But if it's somebody who's just wearing 1 mic, geez, times are tough. Maybe somebody's standing next to him. You could probably comment on this as well as I could. Maybe you can get them a little bit on somebody else's mic. You turn the band way back and hope the band hears them. You just kind of wait till they get off stage. And then there's a sound person backstage and they'll get a new mic on them for their next entrance. But sometimes, stuff goes sideways and you just have to suck it up and get through the show.
Yeah,
You got any comments on this?
Pretty much. It sort of depends on what the number is. If you have somebody that has a completely failed mic, you have to decide whether the words are more important or whether the music's more important. Usually it's the words, but not always. If you're into like the big dance end of a number and somebody's just kind of, vamping on top of it, you don't need to bring the whole energy level down to try to get their words out. But if it's, expository information, you're like, sing out, Louise.
But we also have there's a person backstage on basically every show, sometimes 2 people, and they try and preemptively listen to all the microphones before the people go on. Well, they should be. They probably aren't.
Many of them are.
So sometimes
Many of them are.
they listen and try and make sure that the microphone's still good while they still have time to fix it before they're on stage. They have cans of like spray air, so if the microphone starts getting sweaty, they blow some air in it.
Hopefully
while the
it's
microphone is not on yet, because that gets really loud.
Really loud.
And, or they treat their forehead with there's some kind of thing people do. I don't know how much of it works.
A lot of people are allergic to that, though.
Oh, yeah?
Skin prep stuff.
Yeah, skin prep to try and keep them from sweating, like if you have a real sweaty Betty, You just kind of try and figure it out, kind of person by person, scene by scene, and...
It's the live theater aspect of it.
Yeah, but the sweat is probably the biggest detriment. Sometimes the connectors break and that makes a terrible sound. Sometimes there's just a hair in the mic, which also makes a pretty terrible sound. But you just kind of work around it and try and, cross yourself before every song. Yeah.
I got another one.
Yeah, go.
For the Foley, right?
Yeah.
How do you decide what instrument or item to use for your sounds before you actually make them?
Yeah, it's always ongoing, and it's always a conversation with the director and with Walter, and there's always a lot of options. And so, you could say, you could read a script and say a character gets punched, and if it's depending on what kind of show it is, that punch could be anything. And that's just, again, that's one example of violence is such an obvious one that comes up where we have to use sounds for it. But there's a lot of plays where, or a gunshot, a gun appears and there's gonna be a gun, and 9 times out of 10, they want it to just sound as real as possible. But in most shows, that is the world you're building, is the real world we know. And so in SpongeBob, it's a show where we're creating a whole new world, or one based on this other weird abstract world that they had in the cartoon. So there's infinite options at that point of what it could be. And so a lot of our production based around creating what the world is, and things sound the way they do, not because of the normal logic and the rules of our world, but because of the rules we created in our fictional world. And so a lot of that is very fun, but it's kind of like getting into the director's head and understanding what they want the world to be. Then you have the big picture, and then you go, oh, right, and then that would sound like this. And it's often once you understand what the moment is, or the vision of the piece, or any of these things, the world you're in, the sound then becomes very obvious. And that's what I found. It's understanding the ideas and understanding the perspective first, and then you go, right, it would sound like this.
Mike's probably spent more time thinking about cartoons than anyone you've ever met, I bet.
Yeah, I mean, the cartoon sounds fascinate me. Again, it's all these choices come from this same lineage. They were doing vaudeville shows, and it's, again, they hit a cowbell, someone gets bonked on the head. Then that became a silent cartoon, or a Charlie Chaplin silent movie. They get bonked on the head, same cowbell, same guy. And over years, that became a normal sound. Why would it be a cowbell, be a normal sound for getting bonked on the head? It just became the way we hear it. In a cartoony comedy environment, that's acceptable. It doesn't sound anything like getting bonked on the head, but that's just became the tradition. And now in our world, it's like, oh yeah, it's a cartoony sound, but it fits. And so there's a lot of that, of things that came from the percussion world / the early sound world that became the normal palette that we hear, especially in cartoons.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Another question?
It's my orange.
He would have had to make you move.
Yeah, just being courteous.
I just wanted to know, when you're first joining the entertainment industry, do you feel as if there's a steep learning curve when you're trying to learn how to work on a production or a set? Or do you feel as if there's a lot of just kind of help coming from all around just to get into the groove of things?
I'd say both. Yeah, I'd say there is a steep learning curve. There's a lot that you have to know about the industry that you're in, and working on a Broadway musical is way different than working on a TV set or a movie or any of that stuff. And so the types of people that are your employers and the types of producers and how all of these chains of command work, all of that is super important and relevant to do a good job, to understand that. And it's good to have people like Walter was incredibly supportive and helped me understand the way Broadway works. And so it's a combination. There's a lot to learn and a lot to figure out, and there are tons of people all around everywhere that are helpful and really cool and generous about it.
I would agree. I mean, I really only work in theater, but I would say even every different kind of theater has different rules and different things to know. Doing Broadway musicals is very different from working at a regional theater. It's a whole different environment and a different set of skills to learn. I would say there's definitely a steep learning curve. Like I said, I went to college and we did a lot of sound effects work and Pro Tools, and that has served me well at points in my career, but really when I needed a job, I needed to learn how to screw 2x4s together, and then I needed to learn how to fix a buzzy XLR cable, and set up a comm system. And those were things that I didn't have a great underpinning in, and I had to learn. But I moved to the city, make friends with some people who are in the industry, and they'll help you along and cover for you when you mess up, hopefully, and kind of help you learn the way. But I think there's definitely a learning curve.
So do you feel as if there's any advice that you can give in being able to make that transition from going from a college student into the industry, or?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's really hard to project, I think, at this point in your life and career exactly what you want to do and where you want to do it. But I would say, like, if you want to work on Broadway, get to New York and start working in sound, work out of one of the shops or one of the off-Broadway theaters and meet people. And just, I would say, for whatever kind of work you want to do, get yourself as close to that work as you can be, because you'll start to absorb the nuances of it and figure it out. If you want to work in TV or movies, go to LA and just, call the union, try and get on a job, try and, learn something. Just put yourself in as close of proximity to where the work is as you can.
Yeah, and I would say, I think other people would disagree with this, but in my experience, being in the industry you want to be in is more important than having the job title that you eventually want. And so if you're working as the lowest person on the sound team on a big Broadway show, if you want to sound design for Broadway, I think that's a great place for you to be, versus doing sound design for commercials or something like that. Like, you're the sound designer, but you probably won't be creating a lot of lateral connections. Whereas if you're working in Broadway, even if you're coiling cables, you're dealing with a sound designer who's doing it every day. And so I think there's a lot of value in, like he's saying, being around the thing you want to be doing. And sometimes it's hard to know, and it's good. Like, you could go coil cables for a year on Broadway and be like, F this, like, I do not want to stick with this industry at all, and then you know.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Another question? Kenny's got one.
In the soundtrack to the SpongeBob show, they have like that steel guitar, like Hawaiian thing going. Do you guys play that at a recording, or is there someone there who actually can like play that stuff?
There was the orchestra had 2 guitar chairs. One.
2.5.
2.5. Oh yeah, 2. Yeah. There was a 2.5. There was a guy who played primarily electric guitar, acoustic guitar, steel, nylon string.
Yeah, and lap steel.
But that was the other chair. The second guitar chair had a lap steel, an electric, and an acoustic. So there was a real lap steel in the theater.
And Guitar One played ukulele a lot too, which is
true.
like very Hawaiian SpongeBob sound.
And then down in the orchestra pit, one of the keyboard players also would play acoustic guitar. Sometimes there were 3 guitars playing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When we were going for that, when the orchestrator was going for that most SpongeBob-ness sound, it was a lot of lap steel, ukulele, and kind of like light and dinky sounding percussion, like little blocks or bongos or something. And that was kind of our palette for that SpongeBob Hawaiian-ness. And a funny thing, all of those Hawaiian songs that you hear over and over on SpongeBob, like the burn, those are just stock music. Like, if you search Hawaiian stock music that you could like buy for $1 or license, those are all the first matches. And so they're all just like the cheapest stock music that they use. But because we like all heard them a million times, then it's like, oh, that's what iconic Hawaiian music sounds like. It's from SpongeBob, but it's all just the same stock music.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you. One more question? All right, did you want to do your...
Sure, so just because maybe you don't see this a lot, maybe you want to try some of these ideas of how live Foley works. So I have a very simple Ableton rig, and I thought maybe anyone who wants to could come try accompanying each other. And so if you want to try it, you just have to be prepared to be the actor and the Foley artist.
Let's show you real quick. I'll be
Squidward. So
Slick.
Sorry. Oh my God, there it is.
See?
Oh, I knew it.
Was it you the whole time?
What happens?
I'm new. Okay.
That was the Tony-nominated sound designer, Walter
Thank you.
Trarbach there.
Yeah, so if I were Squidward and I were walking across the stage, I'd be doing this.
You got me. It's
I know.
right.
Yeah, so we
Exactly.
kind of do it like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
you guys
so-
want to give it a try? It's kind of fun.
It's you could be SpongeBob. Anyone want to try it? You could do you could hit each other. You could just stand here and punch each other.
Oh, impressive.
No. I have some guns.
Yes.
Great. Okay. So what do you want to do? You want to do SpongeBob? Yeah, great.
Foley
Okay.
guy. He wants
you
to
can
hit
see
the
here.
buttons.
So right now, this is SpongeBob's steps. So go right up by the chair so you can see your feet. Yeah. So this is SpongeBob's 2 feet.
Okay.
And so you can try it by just watching him, and he'll walk around, and you can. That's really good. That's great.
Dead on.
That's really good. Yeah. Awesome. You want to switch?
Yeah, I'll try it.
Maybe
And
you should
it's-
punch Dobson or
It's
something.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
That's awesome.
Give him a punch.
Oh yeah. So yeah, why don't you two
Yeah,
punch
punch
each
me.
other a little?
Ready?
I go a lot of times, like if there's like a lot of repetitive punching, they'll just do the same sound over and over. It's like machine guns. So it's like, for the stuff like that. And then the like weapons are always fun. Like a shotgun. You want to try cocking a shotgun and then shooting it? So go for it. That's pretty good. Yeah, and so like the physicality of it matters a lot for Foley. Like a lot of people, they'll go for their shotgun cock, and it's like, they're like doing this or something, and you're like, how do you, like?
It's like playing an accordion.
Yeah, or they'll go up like this, and so like if you're looking, like you just have to know the actor and know what you're looking for and all this stuff, and they have to know what they're doing. But hopefully it's easy enough to follow. And the level of their physical mime work matters a ton for how good the Foley comes off. Like if they're not doing it in a way that reads to the audience, the sound can only help so much. And so, someone could do a gesture and then it's like, why is someone cocking a shotgun somewhere else? It's like, what was that? So there's a lot of that. Yeah, does anyone else want to try any of this or perform for your friends?
You know you do. Let's get 2 more volunteers.
Just to punch each other for a minute. They did so good.
How about Jonah and Jess, since you guys are in front?
That's the danger of sitting up front.
Exactly. Do you want to do some footsteps? Is that the Brattle Theater? Oh no, that's something else. I thought it said Brattle Theater. It says Battle. Never mind. So you want to be SpongeBob?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. So that's fun. Those two are SpongeBob. Yeah. Exactly. And the thing, actors especially, like Walter did, as soon as you start, as soon as they go, oh, someone's accompanying my footsteps, they'll do it for a while and then try to psych you out. Like, it's so hard for them not to be like, oh, we'll make a game out of it. And like you're here, I'm going to mess with you. And we had a moment where, like Ethan, our actor who played SpongeBob, we spent so many workshops together that we did so much of that where we'd do a scene and then we'd stop and he'd be walking around and I would keep going and we'd turn it into a game. And eventually we had a bit that just made it into the show where he's walking and then he's like, I'm gonna psych out Mike, and then puts his foot down late. And so it was all just screwing around just like this, where it's like, oh, fun, I can do this now and he has to follow me. And so sometimes those gags last. Do you want us to try him? Or you want to, yeah.
He should be Squidward.
Yeah, be Squidward. Squidward's right here. Wow, that's
Juicy.
yeah.
Good. That's such a good sound.
Yeah, try it again. So I tried to think of like, there's the shape of how your foot hits the ground that's very important for footsteps. If you're doing like traditional film Foley, you usually hear the heel, then the toe. So if you're watching, you'll hear like ka-kunk, ka-kunk, ka-kunk. It's kind of the shape. And accompanying actors, the amount that they roll their foot really affects where the sound should go. So if you roll your foot a lot, you don't want to go too far at the heel part because then it looks like their toe's still off the ground. But if they don't roll their foot at all, it's sometimes harder to like feel where they're going to hit the ground. So just think about all that. He's rolling his feet a little. So if you aim for like literally this, like the microsecond when his heel touches to like for alignment. Try that. Just walk around again. Right? Yeah, that's good. That feels way more connected. That feels really good. And so those kind of things of like the difference between, oh yeah, it's someone walking and it's literally that person's feet making that sound. That's like the area where I'm trying to go, where it makes a difference having someone do it live because it has to sound like his actual feet, not just, oh, it's footsteps. And so those little details in the connection are kind of what it's all about in performance. Cool. You want to do any other stuff? So you want to play? You want to punch each other or anything?
I need breath for that one. I don't know which other ones are there.
Oh yeah, this is all the punches. These are all just like. I didn't even think these are the ones from the show.
No, that's
They're
not
not.
Squidward's footstep from the show.
Yeah, it is.
I don't think so.
Is it too loud? Oh. That one? Okay, great. Does anyone else want to try any Foley? Don't have to. Cool.
Walter and Mike, thank you so much for meeting with us today.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you.
us.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for
listening
being
to us.
here.
Thank you.